following is a local resident producers program. The program content is the sole responsibility of the producer and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of CATV2, Oshkosh Community Media Services, the City of Oshkosh, or Time Warner Cable.
Hi everyone, welcome to Eye on Oshkosh. Cheryl Hentz and Dan Rylance here, along with our guest, a first-time guest for us this evening. She is, as some of you, especially if you have children in the school district here in Oshkosh, may already know who she is, but for many of you, you probably don't know. So we're pleased to introduce her to you tonight. This is Bette Lang. She is our interim school superintendent here in the Oshkosh Area School District, and we hope that this will be the first of many visits that you make here to us. But anyway, we appreciate you coming out on kind of a rainy, not so nice evening and sharing some things with us that are going on in the district. We want to start, of course, because as I said, you know, a lot of people may not know who you are yet. They've probably read about you in the paper, but they've not seen you or whatever. So we thought we'd just start by finding out a little bit about you and where you come from and what your background is.
Well, thank you, Cheryl. It's nice meeting you, and Dan, you as well.
Welcome
so thank
to the
you
show.
for having me. And I very much look forward to being back. We'll see how I do after this time.
It'll be
right?
fine.
Oh, let me know. Okay.
We may not be back.
You may not be back. Okay. Well, actually, this is my 37th year in education. I actually retired last year, June 30th, from Stevens Point Area Public Schools as superintendent. I taught for 12 years in Rhinelander. My undergraduate degree is UW-Stevens Point. I then, after getting an admin degree from UW Superior, I went to Sheboygan as an assistant high school principal, a middle school principal, a high school principal, then down to Beloit to be the director of instruction, and I finished my doctorate from Marquette at that time as well. Then to DeForest as my first superintendency. And DeForest is a 3,000 student district just a little north of Madison. And from there, back to Beloit to be superintendent, then to Stevens Point, and now here. And this was a great opportunity and came at the last minute in the sense because the district had actually offered the job to someone, and that did not work out. So I'm just pleased to be here and to be working with the district. Lots of talent, lots of wonderful students, and a lot of initiatives going and things moving forward, which is always what you want to see in education.
A lot of challenges.
Very much, yes, very much. Mm-hmm.
Well, we're going to talk about those challenges because, the budget was a challenge.
Yes.
We'll talk about that. You've got a referendum that's coming up in spring. We'll talk about that. But what, other than, getting through those major hurdles, Bette, what do you see as kind of your mission, if you will, during the time that you're here, which will be, what, this school year?
I'm thinking this school year. I actually have a contract that's like a daily contract. So if there would become a time that the board would decide, we don't need your services any longer, or we're going to hire someone who can come soon. So it's a very good contract, I think, to benefit everyone, to get me out of the way once a permanent person's hired. But right now, the looking for the next superintendent will begin on December 3rd. That's when the board will meet with the team. So that's kind of in a nutshell where that's headed. And the mission of every school district is to educate. And I certainly am right there, right, wanting to educate. And I think the vision is what changes. And things that have actually affected my vision over the years are obviously the other districts I've worked in, and my own family. I think families affect vision, and they affect visions for students too. So for this district, yes, we have some hurdles. Every district in the state has financial hurdles. The revenue caps, the funding formula from the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction creates a formula that actually brings in between 1.9 and maybe 2.9% of increase in funding, and our largest employee group has to have a 3.8% salary and benefit package if there isn't a negotiated contract. Every year, as you know, running households, all of the transportation costs, food costs, all the utility costs go up. So there's always going to be a gap between expenditures and revenue, and there'll always have to be budget adjustments. And you mentioned this year's budget. we actually just certified, the board certified this budget on October 29th. Before it was certified, there had to be several reductions because it did not balance. And one of the things that in Wisconsin, state law says, nobody else's budget maybe, but school district budgets will balance. And so ours did balance. And it did take some, it was stressful because what it said to people, we now have several people in classrooms, obviously employed. Students are very used to them. So to go cut personnel at this time of the year is not wise. So the reductions came out of supplies, equipment, and those kinds of areas. But it was a hefty reduction, $1.4 or $5 million, depending on how that can go. And that's kind of an expectation in every year that there'll be a gap. Now, it may be a little smaller, it may be a little larger, because budgeting is also dependent on enrollment. And enrollment in the district is dropping a little. So there's several things to be thinking about with that budget. And part of my vision, of course, is to make the best use of every dollar we have to try to keep people in the classroom. That's very important because quality teachers are what make the biggest difference. To keep the optimum number of staff in other areas, optimum meaning how can we efficiently and effectively run this place, not too many people, not too few, but they have to be well trained and good at what they do. So that's the vision there, I believe, is to keep one of the things I always say to my grandsons is you need to learn something new every day. I think that's true for everyone in education and maybe everyone in the world.
Yes.
But that's a vision, to learn something new every day, and that's part of what the funding should do. Create those situations for students to learn something new every day. So this budget that we're working on for 9-10, as we start, and there's no rest for business managers. You certify at the end of October, in November you start working on the next year's budget. So as we work on this next year's budget, we'll then be considering all the categories where we were really at a little bit of a disadvantage, and turnover in staff is probably what caused it. Me coming in September 2nd, that certainly didn't help, getting us all on track. So I think we're going to be in a lot better shape. We'll be talking about reductions January, February, March, having that all settled before the summer. So then, barring any surprises, there should be a different, October 09 should be different than October 08 because we'll have it better planned out, and staff will be in place to make sure that happens.
Well, I know Dan has a question about being a superintendent as a whole, but I just wanted to follow up on something you mentioned now. Since your business people are already kind of starting to work on the budget for the 2009 and 10 school year, with a referendum coming up, I imagine that makes it an even greater challenge because you don't know really how to budget for certain things because you don't know if that referendum is going to pass or fail. So, it's a juggling act.
It is.
Right?
And one of the things that you learn early on in administration is a budget in education is a plan to spend. It's not like your home budget where you kind of have an idea of what your utilities will cost, so you can put in that $100 a month or whatever. In school business world, you have to plan what you think it's going to cost you because, for example, a year ago, no one thought that gas would go the way it did. So we planned to spend a certain amount. Didn't work that way. We had to find money from other places. So that's kind of a part of what we do. We're always planning to spend. Now, the referendum, thank you for asking about that. Right now it's planned to have 3 questions. The first is a new North Side replacement school. It's the Oak Lawn School that's being considered as someone that needs to be replaced. And the second is exceeding the revenue cap for deferred maintenance. The third is exceeding the revenue cap for small projects or additions. Well, the immediate question that comes to mind, and I think it's very good to have 3 separate questions, people can vote, any way they want on those 3. But if the first one doesn't pass, it's a school in need of a lot of maintenance. The second one passes, there's a plan for deferred maintenance, but if that first one doesn't pass and the school doesn't get replaced, a lot of the maintenance money will have to go to that school. So part of what talking about a referendum is talking just what you mentioned, Cheryl, the scenarios, the what ifs, in the sense of if they all pass, all right, then that means the school will get replaced, the deferred maintenance money will go to the list that we have that's been deferred over the years, and the small additions or renovations will be taken care of. Now, if the first question doesn't pass, no new school, then that deferred maintenance money, along with the money that's in the budget for maintenance, and that's another point I'd like to make. In the 07-08 budget, there was about $500,000 for maintenance of building, the preventative maintenance, those replacing things, those kinds of things in buildings. For the 08-09 budget, the plan, again a plan to spend, was to have $900 $200,000 in there because to try not to let the district fall further behind in maintenance. Sure. Well, with having to close that $1,000,000 and some $1,000 gap, we had to take 20% cuts across the board, obviously out of maintenance as well. In the community, I'm sure people are thinking, well, you have deferred maintenance, but you had to step back.
Right.
And we did. We had to step back. Did we step back as far as we were a year ago? No. We have $760,000 in maintenance, which is $260,000 more than we had a year ago. We would have loved to have $900,000, but you've got to balance your budget. So everybody had to contribute to balancing that budget. So that's, that's a hard thing. And the other thing that happens in districts is you have to make some tough decisions. When your revenue is capped, and your expenditures start climbing, you've got to bring those expenditures down. Some districts say, you know what, we're going to raise class sizes, we're going to cut staff, we're going to do those kinds of things, and we're going to keep our money in maintenance at an optimum level. Other districts say, we're keeping programs and people as much as we can, and we're going to defer maintenance. Sure. And so this district, and it's a balance. You know, you have to cut some staff, and you have to do some maintenance. But in this district, the thought was, well, we're going to keep those programs and keep kids moving, and we'll put the maintenance off, and then we'll come to our public and ask, will you support this? The way that the formula is designed is to do exactly what it's doing. It says, okay, local boards, you certify a budget, but your community has to decide truly how much you want to spend on your schools. Because in order for a new school, in order to defer maintenance or exceed revenue caps to pay for it, you have to come to the community to ask. So this formula, as much as people, you hear a lot, I'm sure you too have heard a lot, the revenue cap formula, as much as people, it causes consternation, it really is working the way it should. The community has to say, this is what we want this is how we think our schools should look. This is what we want to pay for. So that's part of the whole process of talking about a referendum.
Okay. As long as we're on referendum, I'd like to keep going on that just for a minute. You've been in schools where you've had referendums in the past.
Yes.
So let's just talk strategy a little bit. What's the best strategy to get a referendum? What are some strategies that you use to get them? And when's the best time to have an election for a referendum? Is it a special election? Is it a regular election? What do you think?
I think it should always be on a ballot with other things.
Okay.
In fact, I really think that having, if the district could have been prepared for November, and I know that it was a busy November, but that would have been a good time.
Yeah.
I do believe that having it on a ballot when a lot of people are coming out, because remember the idea is the community decides, and when you have those high the ballots with the interesting things like president on it, that really brings people out. So I think that's a good time. I don't ever advocate for holding a special election. It costs money. If you're the only one putting a ballot out there, as a school district, you're paying, and I don't know what it would cost here, but in a former district, it would have cost us about $10,000.
Yeah, we're probably between 12 and 15.
Okay, so you're a little bigger than my other district, so that's a lot of money.
It
and
is.
Why, people sometimes are looking to say, well, maybe, I don't know if I want to support this or not. And you know what? Because you spent that extra money, I'm not going to support it, even if I think it's a good idea and I am all for kids. I mean, I believe students need the best chance. So you should always try to tag on, I think.
So you're looking then at the April election,
and Dan,
which is a regular election.
Right. That's the only one that we can really count on, I think, next year. It's
2009 is a lean year for elections. This was a fat year, but
yes. And so our timing probably isn't the best in the sense of having several choices of regular ballots to go on. So that's one of the strategies.
Okay.
The other strategy, it's information. Referendum to me means teaching.
Yeah.
You get an opportunity to explain how the revenue cap works, how the funding formula works, so people can kind of understand, because I'll hear things like, why is there a gap every year? Good question. It's a great question, and it's wonderful to get a chance to say, this is why there, and not only that's why there is this year, it's going to keep going this way because the formula is designed to balance revenue and expenditure. So that's important for people to know. So, ideally, having a long time to educate is good, Dan, and that's sometimes it doesn't happen. Sometimes you're on a tight timeline. I always think of it like the pebble in the pond. You know how those ripples go out? Well, the best strategy, of course, is to have those ripples go all the way out to the edge, so everybody has an idea and can have an informed vote. Because you don't get people out to vote if they aren't really engaged or informed about what the question is and why it's important. So that's the other part.
why have more than one measure on the ballot?
I think choice is important. This is a personal preference, and this is also what I told the board when we were talking about this. I've been in places where there's been one question, everything together in the question. Personally, I want to have a choice when I go to the polls. So I always advocate to say, let's separate this out, because you'll have people who say, you know what, you're right, that maintenance needs to happen, but I don't know if I support additions or small renovations. If I put all those things together, the person who really would like you to fix that boiler or do whatever doesn't have the opportunity to tell you to do that. And remember, the community, this is an opportunity for the community to weigh in on its schools. And so I think you need to set it up so the community actually legitimately can weigh in and have a choice, because that's, I've had the best, I guess, success in the sense of feedback from people. And you, of course, you don't know the thing of a referendum. You do a lot of talking to people before, and you don't get to talk to them very much afterwards.
That's right.
But prior, I've gotten feedback from people to say, you know, this was a good idea, because I was torn between these, the two questions, and I was able to, in my mind, do what I thought was best for the students.
Well, I suppose on one scale, it's probably like voting straight party ticket, and there's a lot of one particular party that you may like, but someone else may not be so great, or voting for the individual candidate. You can kind of pick and choose and really get what you want.
I'm really familiar with initiated measures because I come from a state where we have them all the time.
Yes.
Is your first choice your second choice or your third choice on which ones you're going to pick? Or are you going to go with, I mean, the way you listed them, is that where we're going to go to the school first? Or has that already been determined?
Basically, well, you know what, the informal language in the sense of listing what the 3 items are has been written. We haven't worked with bond counsel yet to say what's the best strategy as far, and Dan, I know you asked me that strategy question, and I'm sure there is a very sophisticated strategy.
I'd be really worried if one goes down.
Okay.
I think the tendency is go no, no, no. I really do.
Okay.
I would, that's what I'm saying, I go.
Yes.
But it is tricky. Well, good luck. I have mixed feelings about splitting it. But anyway. All right, let's say it loses. What does the state say about when you can try it again? How long do you have to wait?
You have to have the language done 45 days before the referendum. So, I mean, with only April as an opportunity, we'd have plenty of time, obviously, to look at that language and do it again. There is no, the way that you could do the February primary if there was one. You could do the April election if there was a September primary, and you could do the November, because it's spaced out, and that's probably good strategy by the state. It was setting it up to allow you to go, if you would want to, keep going back time after time.
Clearly, we'll only have 2 elections in 9, which would be the February primary and the April. There's nothing in September or November.
And Dan, for the February primary, we don't necessarily, unless, for example,
there may not be a primary.
Right. If there are 3 school board seats up and there are 7 people running, then we can have one.
But there's also common council.
Okay, so there's a possibility.
You could possibly, I don't know how many are up, but that's a really low turnout. That will be lower than April, at least historically.
Yes, and every place I've been, the primaries, unfortunately.
So you can do it pretty often then?
Yes, yes.
Okay, let me ask you this as a former superintendent, or for many places, what are the percentages of winning the first time versus the second time or the third time?
Very interesting. What I have found is, in DeForest, actually, when I started this, we went for a new high school and a piece of land, 2 separate questions.
On the same time?
On the same time, okay. So what did we win?
Probably the land.
The land, absolutely, Dan, the land. And so, now we have this beautiful piece of land and nothing to build on it. So the board decided we were not going to go at the very next election. They waited probably 6 months or maybe a year, and then went back again. So that was a strategy at that time. So and I've seen.
And you won the second time.
Yes,
on the school.
Yeah, they did. And I've been watching the elections that are taking the ballots across the state. There were 52 school districts who had some type of election, something on the ballot. Sometimes a school, sometimes operational. Operations.
Talking
big.
November 4th.
November, yes, November.
We're taping on the 6th.
Yes.
But okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
No.
Thank
but that's
you for
good. Just
setting that up. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And about half of them passed.
Okay.
And but unfortunately, some place that like Rhinelander, and of course I taught in Rhinelander, so I kind of follow them. This was, I believe, the 3rd time they went back, and they lost by very small margins. First time, second time, and this time I think by 130 votes or something. So I don't know. I have never done a study of that to know what the chances are. I do know though, many times going to referendum is a way to get people engaged, because all of a sudden people say, oh, there's a referendum, you know, that pebble in the pond if those waves didn't get out. So the next time they are more alert and engaged in it. So sometimes it's good to go back a second time. It catches people that maybe weren't with you the first time. You know, about 25% of the families in any school district have children in school. 75% don't. And if you think about your way to educate, you know, if you don't have children in school anymore, you may not be tuning in as much as you did when you were a parent. You know, obviously our grandparents tune in, and that's wonderful. But even then, you know, grandparents don't always live in the same town that their grandkids live in. So
that's a good response to those things. Do you want to keep going on this, or want to go back to the general sort of thing?
We can keep going with the referendum thing.
Okay, you got more questions you want to answer?
Well, yeah, just a couple, I guess, unless something else pops up. We're going to talk a little bit later about the workshop that you all had at your last board meeting, you know, with the architect. But right now, I mean, one of the questions, as you mentioned, Betty, is, you know, a new school for the north side. But it still is up in the air as to where that school will be.
Yes, it is, Cheryl.
You know, and so that has to be part of the mix here too, because I have to believe that you're going to have some people who would maybe be in favor of a new school if it were in such and such a spot, but not in spot B.
Exactly.
Or spot C. So you kind of have to have all these pieces in place before you can start educating the public about the referendum. So knowing that, going into this, and I'm not trying to delay the referendum here because I think it's important that this district get off the dime and do something. But it's also, I think, equally important that it be done right if you're going to do it. You know, that's what my folks always taught us as kids. You know, if you're going to do it right, or as best as you possibly can. So knowing that you have to decide on where this new school, proposed school, is going to go, do you still think that April is a realistic timetable to get out there and really educate the folks?
It's a very tight timeline, and we and coming September 2nd probably wasn't optimum either, you know, as far as getting engaged in the process. And what we've put together is to say by the first part of December, by the first meeting, we really need to know where the land will be, and there are several reasons for that. The conditional use permit that's in the city of Oshkosh requires actually needs to have a plan drawn up for the school. And of course, an architect will say to you, I can't draw up a plan for you until you tell me where the land is, so that I can design this and do, you know, what you need done, because they have to do a lot of things. And one of the, and if I can go right into what the workshop was with the architect.
Sure, we can talk
Is
about
that okay?
Sure.
I'll just kind of briefly say one of the interesting parts was, you know, there's been a lot of talk. Do we just rip down the old part of Oakland, the 1953 edition, I guess would be the way to say it, and then try to replace, you know, that. It would be a bigger footprint, because part of the reason for building a new school is there's no art room or music room or cafeteria or multi-purpose room, whatever you want to call it there. So it would you need to bring it up to a standard that the district has decided is good for elementary schools. So that would take more land. And then as our architect was talking, he said, no, you're aware that you need to take care of the runoff. When you put a hard surface down, you have to have retention ponds or some way to handle this, storm, sewer, you know, whatever happens. So as he was talking, the reason we'd invited him in is we had some thought on the board, well, can we do this with a smaller piece of land? What, you know, do we need to, there's 40 acres on Riff Road, is that a good place? And of course the board is looking, they realize the district owns that 40 acres, but is that the optimum place to put a school? So they're trying to do that kind of research. And as our architect said, the guidelines, there are no laws or rules in Wisconsin to tell you how much land you need, but there are guidelines. So it's 10 acres for an elementary school, and then for every 100 more students in that school, it'd be another acre. Sure. So he said ballpark 10 to 15 acres. You know, that it's ballpark. Then also it depends the kind of land you have and how much a retention pond you might need. Think about that for your acreage. You know, do you want to put ball fields or other kinds of athletics fields or play fields there? All those kinds of things have to be taken into consideration and have to be in place before you go for your conditional use permit. So that whole, it ties itself right back in again. You need to decide about the land. Then as you ask, all right, then I start to say, all right, group, let's start going out and talking about this referendum. Well, by all intents and purposes, I would hope we'd be ready by the end of January. That gives us 2 months. And 2 months is, even though this is very nice of you to have me on, this gives me an opportunity to talk. The newspaper has put some things in. But again, reaching out to the edges of your public here so you get the whole community to understand and realize what's going on and why they should be interested or care about it, it's a tough sell in 2 months. It's very tough to get out there and make all that information
Well, you'd
available.
have a little bit longer, probably about 3 months, 2.5 months, 3 months, something like that. But even at that, I've seen districts where, they've used the better part of 6 months and
Yes.
beyond, educating, holding public forum after public forum after public forum, and really, selling their message to the community and making sure that as many people as possible could be on board.
Absolutely, and are informed, and that would be a I think you can do it. I think you just need many people doing it. In other words, it's not a job. 2 people can't take this out and inform the whole public.
Right.
You'd need to have quite a group of people understanding what has to happen and moving it out into the public and being available for public forums.
Yes.
I'll keep Betty out of this comment, but the other issue is this is not a board that does these decisions quickly.
No, no.
And so, it might, it's a minimal time, but, how long have we talked about plans A, B, C, D, E, G, E, F on their show? A couple
It
years?
seems forever. It seems all of my natural life.
All of your natural life.
It seems they've been doing this.
Oh, wow, I didn't think it was that long.
Well, it certainly seems
It
like
seems
it.
like that, yeah.
Okay, so, what have you been hearing from the district about Riff Road? Because for me, and I don't have kids in the district, but, as I'm driving around, Riff Road to me seems pretty far out.
Well, I think yes. I think you would think of it that way, just like I look at Green Meadow and Lakeside schools are in the southern part of our district. They seem far. I guess it's relative. And what typically happens is when you build a school, area develops. And I've seen that happen. I think you've seen that happen here with Traeger. Just in a short time, you have subdivisions developing around it. So that typically happens. Now it's still a bus ride. And right now we have about half of the students who attend Oak Lawn ride a bus. So going out to Riff Road, it would be all the students because there aren't any sidewalks. So until a subdivision would develop or have sidewalks there, you would have people driving. Then begs the question, and one of the other things the architect talked about was green and sustainability and those kinds of things, and said, okay, so you think about this, you have a lot of cars taking students, or do you just put everyone on buses? You take fewer buses, you run the students out there. Is that better? There's all these questions, and you're right about the time frame. Those are questions that are important and need to be answered and discussed. So it is. It's a challenge, and I think you're right. I think others may feel Riff Road is out on the edge of and it is on the edge of the district, and that's why the board, I think, is taking a little time, Cheryl, to look at, are there other options? Are there other maybe better situated? One of the things the architect said was in some districts, maybe the school has a 5-acre parcel, but it's backed up to a city park. So you really get the best of both worlds. You get good use of public land and for everyone. So, and I don't know if there are places like that where we've invited David Buck to come to the next board meeting just to talk about areas in the city of Oshkosh under development. What's going where? What's the vision? For certain areas, so that the board is well informed on that as well. But sometimes schools tend to go to open areas on edges for a lot of reasons.
That's a classic urban history study. That
Well,
they will follow it.
Yes.
Well, that brings me to another question then, as far as planning, because if you're hoping that by putting a school on Riff Road, development will then be encouraged, if you will, to develop, then aren't you in danger of outgrowing your school?
Well,
and how do you plan for that contingency?
And I think that's what we call redistricting or redrawing the boundaries, because that's part of what has to happen.
This district doesn't do that quickly either.
Well, that's what I understand. I have heard a little history. I have heard some history, and it's a difficult thing. It is. It's very, and it's emotional.
It's impossible.
Cheryl, I'll tell you. And it'd be wonderful.
That's been going on forever.
Yes. Be great if we could have a crystal ball and we could say, okay, everyone who has children in school right now, you're going to finish in this school, but everyone new who's coming, we're going to put you you in a different school so that we can balance out the population, because that's a constant struggle. This district has many small elementary schools, and which is a philosophical approach to education that children can walk to school. But the times we live in, many children don't walk to school. Parents are concerned about safety. They're very legitimate concerns. And so, all right, do we really need to have many small elementary schools if no one's taking advantage of why they were there in the first place? Times have changed. We have to accept that. So do we try to get not so big that we're impersonal, but little bigger so we're efficient and still personal, and keep kids engaged. So it's just it's a constant battle, and it really is a philosophical community decision. Again, hence we go to referendum, because that's how the community can help decide.
Sure.
Go back to the big picture now. We started with trees. I want to go to the forest.
All right.
How generic is being a school superintendent? You mentioned in your vita, just talking about it, 3 or 4 places. Are you doing 90% of the same thing as superintendent of each school, or is it 50-50 or what?
I think I had an opportunity to speak to a service group in town, and I said, I don't know how to be an interim. I know how to be a superintendent. The job is a generalist job. I think that's probably the best way to say it. You oversee finance and personnel and curriculum and student services, and you're overseeing those kinds of departments in every district. Now, sometimes if you're in a small district, you are maybe the superintendent and the personnel person. I've always been in larger districts where I've had someone manning those positions, and then who report to me, and I team with them. But I've also had the opportunity to have people, for whatever reason, maybe leave mid-year. So I got the opportunity to fill that spot along with being a superintendent, even just for a semester, but it is very educational. So what you find yourself doing, Dan, it is a generalist job. You need to know enough information to help keep your staff on track. You don't have to know that, like in the budget code, there's something called the woofer. It's the way the state sets up its budget. I don't have to know that what 899 means, in that code, but I better know the general budgeting principles. I better know what to look for when looking to save money. What are things we better not cut? What areas that you better not cut, because we're going to need those things. I have to know about curriculum. I have to stay on top of things that are important in curriculum, not detailed little programs, but standards and benchmarks and learning goals and those kind of things. Hiring practices. Most important thing we do with adults is hire. I mean, it's just so important. So it's really important to work closely with your HR department so that you have a good process in place. And this district does have a great process. An evaluation of staff. It's not enough to just hire them. You have to train and evaluate, so you keep them at the peak of their game. And I think all those things, it's really, there's a lot of similarities in the job. The differences, of course, are the people with whom you work.
And you mentioned vision earlier when Cheryl asked. That was another difference.
Yes.
All right, the board asks you to write the job description for their person that they're looking for. Is previous superintendent experience a requirement for the next superintendent of schools in Oshkosh?
The size of your district, the complications in the district with the fact that budgeting is as it is in this state, now not just your district, any district, I would say having a little experience would be beneficial. And I say that because it's the kind of job that calls for you coming in and getting, there's no honeymoon in a job, in any job. But nowadays in a superintendent job, you have to get to work right away. So having a little knowledge of what that work is important. But I have to say, I've worked with superintendents who were assistant superintendents in very large districts who I think came very well equipped. So it is, but there's that exposure, that opportunity to struggle with the problems, to hear other people's solutions for the problems. Those things all grow you in your position as superintendent. So it is and the other thing that I think is misleading, I've always been very fortunate to have staff with whom to work who are experts in their areas. They're very small, there are 25 large districts in the state, 7,000 or larger. The other 401 are smaller. So here, if you're superintendent in a smaller district, you are everything. You have to know all the laws, you have to stay on top of all those kinds of things going on. So that part, I think if you come from a smaller district, the size of the district doesn't matter. You are getting the experiences you need, so I wouldn't be concerned there. I would want to know, though, what's the depth of your experience? And as I said, an assistant superintendent in a very large district is going to have...
Does it all.
Yes, just like, and a superintendent in a small district has had to do it all. Maybe not with as many people,
Right.
but has had those experiences. So again, I think you're looking for the match of, not everybody brings the same talent and
Right.
skills. And the leadership profile that this district has done is a good one, and it lays out the talents and skills you're looking for. Communication always is number one, I mean, it's very important, but again, expertise in certain areas, ability to make decisions, all those things come out. And I think that there's a good roadmap, so to speak, to say, okay, Betty, what are your talents and skills, and are they a match here? Doesn't mean you're a good or bad superintendent. We need this in this district at this time. And I think that's, you're very well set up to be looking for what you need to make the
I have
place
just
hum.
a couple more follow-ups
Sure,
on the
sure,
superintendent. Anti-teachers. There seems to be a fairly, I don't know how large it is, but is this true in all districts, that there is just a group of people in the community that just basically don't like teachers?
I never understood that, but I do find that. And is it, I always wondered the motivation, Dan. Is it because maybe they didn't have a good experience with teachers, when they were children or students in
They got
school?
their knuckles wrapped with
Yes.
a ruler one committee.
You don't know, Cheryl. I mean, it'd be interesting to have someone articulate why that is. But yes, I do find people, sometimes I actually have people will say to me, well, they only work 9 months. And
all
there's
the time.
just, yes, there's that kind of a sentiment, and they actually work. I mean, they have to do other things
You
in
have
the
no idea
summer.
what they do for 9 months.
Yes, and what they do for 9 months, and then how they keep preparing themselves again for that
Yeah.
next 9 months. So that unfortunately, there's anti-administrators.
Yes.
There's always a sentiment, I think, that either maybe they don't understand the job, and I think that sometimes has something to do with it, or they just, have decided that it was not a good experience, someone didn't do right by them or their children. And that happens, we're human and we do make mistakes. And it's just, it is unfortunate because the world really needs to have highly engaged people with positive outlooks, I think, and to struggle with problems and get good solutions. It's very tough when you get a big, a pool of negativity that really doesn't want to look at any solution. We have to be able to solve things, and sometimes we have to learn to tolerate, and maybe we don't like a certain person, but if that person is providing a valuable service, our personal feelings shouldn't stop the person from doing the job. So I know it's a struggle. So yes, we're very typical can be we're typical. Oshkosh is typical of Stevens Point and Beloit and the other places that where I've worked.
Are they as nasty in other communities as some of what we've seen here?
Well, Cheryl, I don't know how much blogging and those kinds of things are really making us a better place. Do you know any district or any community? Because there's something to be said, I think, for standing up and saying what you believe, and when you can do things anonymously, and that's very difficult. It doesn't lend itself well to the kind of spirit, and vitality I think anyone wants in their community. So yes, I've seen that nastiness. Of course, and being in administration, sometimes I'm the brunt of it, which I understand. That just like any public figure, even though I'm not elected, I'm still a public figure. So I understand, that people have opinions. I always wish that I could meet them and we could maybe discuss what their opinion is, but I'm not so lucky to do that. So, the motivation is always amazing to me, that people, if they really have a beef, why wouldn't you want to come in and talk about it? And maybe we have to agree to disagree, but you have an opportunity to at least meet the person face to face and say, okay, here's why I made that decision. Here's what I was thinking. Now, what are you thinking? Well, how would you? And so, there's always that element. And we're interesting because we're trying to raise students to be, good global citizens. That's what our mission says, and to contribute to the world. And then sometimes as adults, we don't always model. And if we could only know how much children are watching us. They're watching everything we do and everything we say. And, you hear the story of the little kindergartner who comes to school and says something inappropriate because that's what he or she heard mom or dad say. And parents are like, oh. And those kind of things are wake-up calls. Those little children are watching and listening and, yes, parroting back. And it's just, we are so important as adults to our children, to the next generation. And we just have to take that so seriously.
Yep.
One more?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay.
You're on a roll.
Special ed question.
Yes.
My wife's a special ed teacher. My mother-in-law is a special ed teacher. And I talk to teachers, particularly on the elementary level. And one thing that appears to be happening is that because of inclusion or mainstreaming, whatever, a typical elementary teacher might get 3 or 4 special ed students in their class, and they're not being assisted by aides. It's too overwhelming. Is that a pattern that's, I know special ed is not funded by the feds and there's more pressure, but is that an issue for a superintendent that?
It is, and you know, it's an issue in every district
Okay.
because part of what the law, the Individuals
Right.
with the Disabilities Education Act says is you need to put students in the least restrictive
Right.
environment. And sometimes that is the regular classroom
Right.
because some children's disabilities are not, they're not that disabled. I mean, they're able to function very
And
well.
parents who know the law want that.
Want
right?
that for
Yep.
their children. And I think the way we go about it is important. First of all, regular ed teachers are expected now to take on more and more, just as special ed teachers are. I mean, it's the way of the world, just as you two are in what you do, so it's just how we work. And we have to make sure we train our regular ed teachers so they understand. We have to also be sure we set up our special ed students for success. So maybe you don't start the school year with the special ed students in the class. Maybe if it's certain kinds of disabilities, they sort of earn their way into the class so that they can be comfortable coming in and the other students are comfortable. Because the teaching is a difficult job. It's extremely important. I think it's the most important job, but it's very difficult. So unless we lay the groundwork, it's just like incorporating any new person, you know, a new child into the school. Unless you do that well, that child's never going to feel accepted and be part of the class. So we do it. We don't have paraprofessionals with every child. We do when we can. We have team teaching when we can. But there are many times the regular ed teacher is working, you know, with 2 or 3 students with special needs in the classroom, and that relief is sometimes difficult to find. So it is the way that the world is going.
Yeah, No Child Left Behind isn't helpful because they're going to be, those special ed kids are going to be taught on the same standards as a regular ed.
Yes, and there's, you know, the difference you can make as a special education teacher. You try to help fill the gap or try to do the extra things that a child needs for skills, and it's difficult because you're balancing, all right, you need to be in your regular ed class for this, but I need to work with you so that we can make sure you have the skills to, and so I understand your family they're working very hard to do the right thing for children and sometimes under pretty extreme circumstances.
Thank you for your answers.
Yeah,
Cheryl?
All right. Declining enrollment, you had mentioned that our enrollment here is dropping a little bit, Betty. Do we know what that's attributed to? I mean, is it more and more folks doing homeschooling? Is it people just not having as many children these days who are, you know, entering the school district as opposed to those who are leaving the district? Or is it people who are they're not happy with the district and they're moving, or a combination of everything?
I was going to say yes. I think you hit it on the head. It really is a combination of everything.
Yeah.
From the numbers that I've looked at, our homeschool population doesn't seem to be changing. We have about the same number, using private or parochial schools. So that's, I mean, that's sort of borne out. I think part of it is that people aren't having as many children. Our population across the state is dropping. The places that are getting an influx of children are on state line. For example, when I was in Beloit, we gained
Illinois,
students there, from the Illinois area. I think the Hudson area over near Minneapolis, Minnesota, they're getting students. But the center of the state, and Stevens Point included, my last district, we were gradually dropping students, and I do think it's, you know, I think we just aren't having as many children as we used to, and the state of Wisconsin, supposedly, the child population is going to continue to drop a little bit. The trend line is down. Now, when you get new people moving in, if you have minority students moving in, you have families moving in, we have a Hmong population, that can change. So I can say to you today, well, our population's dropping, but if something happens in our community, we could have a whole influx of new students just like that, which is also very challenging. You know,
Well, yeah, from a planning standpoint.
Yes,
I mean,
yes.
you know, my goodness. Okay, let's talk about this survey that was recently sent out, because there's certainly been some rumbling in the community about this. There was a survey sent out, and I guess, you know, some people are saying, hey, we've got district children in the district, we didn't get the survey. Others are saying, we've got children in the district and we got multiple surveys. What was the survey to actually look at? You know, what information were you seeking, and how did you determine who got sampled?
Yeah, that's interesting. Let's see. Let me start. 2006, Cheryl. There was a focus group. There's a company that came in and did a focus group of community members. So the board had a sample of what a focus group we know isn't a survey, but it was an opportunity to hear what people in the community were saying. Last spring, the district did a survey of teachers and internal staff. Let's say it that way, and had plans then to do all parents in November during parent-teacher conferences. So all parents should have gotten one survey. I think if you have multiple students, you may have gotten a number to use, to go online and do the survey, because there was a lot of encouragement to use the computer so we have less paper. So every parent should get one for sure, and I guess if you have multiple students that they would like you to answer, like your high school student and your elementary, you may have two different sets of information you want to give. So that's why they had multiple surveys of, for different levels, because there were different, you have different opinions possibly about your high school as you do about your elementary school. But everyone should have gotten one. So that's a little disconcerting.
Everyone who has a child.
That's,
okay.
Yes.
What information were you looking for?
It's a communication environment survey. How can we serve you better? How engaged is your child in school? It's kind of to help us be better at serving students. That's really what it's about. And of course, there's a communication part for parents. To say, are we doing? Do we tell you enough? Do we tell you too much? How do you like this to work? And then the board picked out a few questions that it wanted to put in, talking about finances in the district and just kind of some general questions for the parents. As we're looking at making decisions, what are kind of things how important are these things to you? And there were 10 different things that you could kind of rate and say, well, this is extremely important, but this one's not that important at all. And then that gives the board kind of a flavor when making decisions. All right, this is a generally your parents of our students think this is pretty important, so we should be considering that when we as administrators make recommendations, and then when the board deliberates and decides to vote. So that's the survey. So I'm very sad to hear that people were feeling like they were missed, because every parent should have had at least with a child should have had at least one survey or more with multiple children, and it would be their choice, I believe, to fill it out if they felt like, I want to tell you about my high school experience, but my elementary is just fine and I'm not going to say anything. Or I want to tell you about how both of my children are doing in school.
And students themselves were surveyed also?
That I'm not aware of, that students were surveyed.
Because that was something else that it was kind of floating around the internet, is that opinions were being sought from both parents and students.
Okay, and that the school perceptions group with whom we're working, I haven't seen the student survey. Now, students may be asked to answer some questions. I know that they did some straw polling for the November election, but I'm not aware that they were surveyed in the sense of collecting the data and then taking a look at the aggregate and seeing what it actually tells us about our services to people.
All right. Can we go back to the referendum?
No.
No.
I want to discuss for a few moments, Betty, the advantages and disadvantages to building new versus retrofitting something else. There's been discussion in the community about retrofitting the COPS building. And I suppose now it could be either of the COPS buildings, because there's one vacant down the frontage road, and the one on Jackson, I think, is still vacant also.
Yeah, they can't find a buyer for it.
So, but as I understand it, and I don't know that this is accurate, it would cost more to kind of remodel that or retrofit it than it would to build new. But that's why I posed the question to you, because what are the advantages and disadvantages to each?
And not being an architect, Cheryl, or as someone in constructions, I can tell you off the top of having very limited experience in looking at a building to use for an alternative school in a different district, and having to meet code. And by meeting code, I mean if you have X amount of children in a school, you have to have X amount of bathrooms. And sometimes buildings are built on a slab, and for you to get bathrooms and plumbing, I mean those kinds of things. It could be a building that had asbestos in it, depending on how old it is. And there's just several, the heating runs, for example, in a large warehouse building, you have to have heat coming in. Every room needs heat. Every room needs ventilation. So how do you make sure if those pipes aren't running? So there's just a lot of expense. And sometimes the building that is standing there wasn't really, it was in a TIF or a TID, which sometimes people don't build for very, very long time, and possibly that building then isn't really designed, it's going to need so much reinforcement, or, so there are just a lot of concerns with retrofitting a building. I've also been involved with retrofitting an old school, or a school that was previously used by someone else, and then it was an expensive venture, but it made more sense because it was really set up as a school, and the bathrooms need to be refurbished, but they were there, and there was a kitchen. You know, there's all these things that you really need in a school that in a large warehouse type building you're not going to find, and you're going to have to put in. So that's it. The other thing that people are concerned about, or I hear parents talk about, is green space. I'd like my child to have some green space. Now, is that ideal, or is that necessary or nice to have? Well, I guess it's an opinion. You know, yes, maybe having some green space for children to run around. The other is busy intersections. If we could have, you know, a school that's not in the middle of an industrial or commercial area, it should be in a residential. So sometimes you can't find a building like you're talking about in an area that is what parents would consider safe, and then we go back to that whole not letting my child walk to school because it got across very busy streets, and you know, so it's all those things. So that retrofitting, I hear a lot more around the state of building new or a old school and refurbishing a school that it was a school and it's going to be a school again, than I hear about buying up an empty, like in a mall or something, you know, buying up a spot and doing that. So
well, and you know, you mentioned green space. It just green from a sustainability standpoint. You know, we're hearing so much more about that these days. You mentioned it earlier, and I would think that, I mean, yes, it costs more in many cases to go green, but long term you're saving money. And I understand not in all cases does it cost more, but in many cases it does. But I would think that to go green in something, some other kind of building that you're trying to retrofit into a school, that concept would probably cost more than if you just started from scratch.
Right.
So,
as our architect was explaining that geothermal heating, you need to have a piece of land in order to sink those pipes in order to do the geothermal. Now, you don't need tons, but again, if you're taking a building that's empty right now, that's all surrounded with blacktop, and you really wanted to do something with geothermal, you wouldn't be able to. So it doesn't, you know, it's that whole, it's a philosophical discussion, and you're right, affordability is always something, but payback is something too. You know, just like changing out those light bulbs in your house, the ones that are more economical are a little more expensive in the beginning, but they last.
So a lot longer.
Yes, exactly. So all those decisions.
I want to turn to retirement investments.
Yes.
The Sunday New York Times, November 2nd, had a lead front page story about the plight of several Wisconsin school districts that have lost large amounts of money on teacher retirement funds in the recent Wall Street thing. Now I thought, well, gee, that's interesting, because I thought all the retirement funds for all the schools was in the regular Wisconsin retirement fund thing. In your experiences, other places are here? Is that pretty common? That
Yes, actually it is in the retirement fund, and I wonder if they were talking about what they're calling other post-employment benefits. One of the things that's changed in Wisconsin it's a GASB, one of those government accounting principles that it's number 45 that's changed, that now says, see what I meant about a generalist, you know, just enough to be dangerous, yes.
Really woke me up.
And it now says you have to put out your unfunded liability, and obviously when teachers and administrators and other staff are having retirement insurance, in other words, you retire and the district pays you 6 years or whatever, gives you 6 years of insurance, that's an unfunded liability. That now has to be reported out, and it's a large number because we obviously have people who may have retired 5 or 6 years ago and still may have 2 or 3 years on, plus our new people go off. So that number what some people were trying to do was fund that unfunded liability, and that may have been where it
didn't work.
It didn't work, and because the market went the wrong way. Right. And you know, we're used to a time, you know, knock on wood, there were times when you did do that kind of borrowing, and you actually did better for your district, but now is not the time to do that. But right now, I am in the retirement system as a retiree, no longer putting money in. But what I hear is that they're holding their own, as far as investments, but that's it's a constant concern, I think,
and
for
I heard
everyone.
that you may by May get a reduction. Is that when it's
That's what
decided?
I'd heard, yes, that by May there'll maybe, what they do is once a year they make that correction.
Right.
So they'll make a correction and see how it goes. But so for right now, it's districts, what'll show up now on our audit reports, and yearly we're audited, and that's by law, it will show, our unfunded liability will show up, and obviously that's going to be, we don't have an offsetting revenue for that. So that's going to be a concern, I think, and it's an education process again to say to people, what we do and what almost every district does is we pay as we go. Right. Every year we pay, whatever it is we owe, and that keeps everyone covered, and retirees insurance and everyone covered, and we just keep moving forward. But it's always a balancing act. And then when people say, well, what does your budget go for? 80+% is salary and benefits of employees. We're a people business in that sense, and so that's going to be an expense.
We're running out of time. I have one question on the election, or do you have?
Yeah. No, go ahead.
Okay, real quickly, I want to know who made the decision to change the traffic patterns for the 7 Oshkosh schools that have hosted voting on November 4th. Where did this come from?
A committee. Did you want that answer, Danny?
Well, no, I've heard that, but I want to know where it started, because committee is circular. It had to start somewhere. Did it start with parents? Did it start with the school? Where did it start?
I don't know. I can tell you who was involved. Maybe that's the best. Maybe I don't know that I can determine. I was invited to the meeting of everybody at the table. So, but parents we heard from parents of concerns of safety for their children. Here's a parent, and this is very true. All year long, you lock all your doors except your front door. You monitor everyone who goes in and out. So on voting day, you open up your school, and not every school's like this, but some you have to walk right through the school to get to the poll. This is going to be, and we were also told by the county, this is going to be very heavy turnout. We all thought that it would be extremely heavy turnout, and how we're going to manage this. So a team of people, police, people from our school, people from the county, got together to talk about how do we manage this. And at that point in time, our principals who were there said, probably our largest space is our gym. That would be the largest space, and it's not always ideal, because sometimes you have to come in from the outside, sometimes you have to still snake through the school a little bit, but it would be the easiest for us to say, children, you stay on this part of the building, and adults who are coming to vote, you stay in this area, and parents then can have some comfort to know that we are going to set it up so that our two populations stay separate, and then our children had lunch in their rooms, so they weren't using their cafeterias or gyms, those kind of things. So I think the intent, Dan, I think it started with safety for children, and then from there, how do you make this happen? And thank you for letting me be on, because I'd like to thank everyone who worked so hard. We had extra police around, we had volunteers who were around to try to make sure that everything did go smoothly and that people knew where they were going. I was at a couple schools, and there were people who showed up who thought that was their ward, and actually it wasn't. So we had some of that, and thank goodness it was a beautiful day. No one seemed to mind to turn around and go a different direction. But that's where, and so I guess it came from, I can't say that someone just said, okay, we're going to do this. It was a general discussion with safety of students as the first criteria, and then how do you work back from there to make it happen.
Well, this committee, is it like a standing committee that gets together on a regular basis to discuss issues, or was it something formed just for this?
The acronym was EPCOT, and I don't know what that
stood
for, but I thought
was Mickey Mouse there?
Mickey Mouse wasn't there. No, I don't think so anyway. But there is a safety committee in the district that does have this kind of representation, and this other committee, the smaller committee, EPCOT, I believe, was an outgrowth of that, because it was just and I guess getting feedback is important in the sense of, it was a great day, so maybe walking a few more steps wasn't such an issue, but if it was been terrible weather, I think it
might have been different.
It might have been different, Dan, absolutely.
So you plan to do this then for future elections?
I think that's what they're planning to do, but that certainly can be talked about, and it did work to keep the children, more isolated, I guess, in the sense of away from the very busy polls, even though, like you said, the morning was the most busy, but they were still, it was steady traffic all day long.
We're out of time.
Yeah.
We are.
You said that in unison. Very good.
We're a good team. We've done this a while.
Yes.
Well, thanks so much for being here. And, we sincerely want you to come back. And it'll become more important, I think, as this referendum starts to unfold.
Thank you for your insights. I thought they were very insightful.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. It's very much of a pleasure to be here, and I'll look forward to being here.
All right.
Sounds good.
Thanks.
Thanks very much for joining us. We'll see you next time. Until then, take good care. Keep your eye on us. We've got our eye on Oshkosh.